Buenos dias. Good morning. I am Capricia Penovic-Marshall, Ambassador in Residence and Vice Chair of the Advisory Council at the Atlantic Council here at the Adrienne Arche Latin America Center. On behalf of the Center and our partner in this event, the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center, led by Director Josh Lipsky, we are pleased to welcome all of you to today's conversation on Argentina's economic outlook for 2023. As a reminder, we have Spanish-English translation available today via the Zoom interpretation feature. You can also follow our discussion live at AC LATAM with the hashtag #FutureOfEcon. As the IMF and World Bank wraps their annual meetings, this center has engaged with regional ministers of economy and trade to address critical global economic issues. Today's conversation comes at a pivotal moment for the Argentine government and global economies. On the one hand, many economies around the world face inflationary pressures, macroeconomic undertakings, while stemming from the Russian war on Ukraine and supply chain disruptions. While central bank actions in advanced economies threaten to dampen global outlook. On a more positive note, despite other challenges, Argentina has some really great news to share. Last week, upon the completion of the IMF's Executive Board review of an agreement under the Extended Fund Facility Managing Director, Georgieva, stated, in response to the market disruptions of mid-2022, Argentina's new economic team adopted decisive corrective measures that are starting to restore confidence and policy credibility. The board granted Argentina access to the equivalent of nearly $4 billion in funds. Going forward, questions abound. Where might the Argentine government where might the Argentine economy be headed in the coming months and years? How might recent IMF deals alter the country's fiscal health and growth path? In what ways can the United States, including its private sector, better support the Argentine economy? To unpack these questions and many others, we are so pleased to welcome today at the Atlantic Council, Argentina's Minister of Economy, Sergio Massa. First, I am pleased to introduce my colleague, Jason Marczak, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arche Latin America Center, who will moderate today's discussion. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Capricia. Muchas gracias. Señor Ministro, buenas tardes. Es un gran privilegio que está
Good
aquí.
afternoon, Minister. It's such a pleasure to have you here at the Atlantic Council to talk about the economic outlook of Argentina, not just this year, but looking toward the future. This is the second to last event in our programming for this week. Many of your colleagues from all around the world have been here at the Atlantic Council this week, but it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you personally and introduce you to our audience. Sergio Massa is the Minister of the Economy for Argentina. And not just that, he also holds the portfolios of agriculture and production. So that's why many people refer to you as a super minister. It's great to have super as part of your title. Now, I'd like to remind the audience that it's not the first time we've had Minister Massa here. We first had you here in 2014, a few years ago, yes. We didn't have as much gray hair, at least I didn't, but you were here as a congressman at that time. So I'd like to begin. Minister, you're here at a very important time, not just for Argentina, but for the entire world. Last week, the Executive director of the IMF finished the review of the arrangement under the extended fund facility, providing access to almost $4 billion in funding to Argentina. And the managing director said that you and your team had taken corrective and decisive measures that were restoring confidence. So to begin, Minister, could you tell us a bit about what these measures have been and what your strategy is for continuing to enhance the country's economic credibility at this important time? First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. For me and for Argentina, the Atlantic counts as a friendly place. It's a place that is always there to help when Argentina faces challenges. So thank you for opening the doors to us once again. So I want to clarify something about super minister or super ministry. This was a response to the formation of the government coalition at a particular time where the Southern Hemisphere in winter, June, July, was experiencing a shift. Similar to what we see in Europe with the winter heading in, it just highlights the importance of the war Russia is waging on the Ukraine and what that means for the world. It has an impact in terms of fertilizers, energy, and food production. So the decision was to put all economic issues together. The coalition decided to put those in one ministry for purposes of stabilization in light of the economic shock, which was exacerbated by the departure of the economy minister, which was also a political issue. This raised expectations had an impact on currency demand. When I took office, we had an exchange rate of 356 pesos. In fiscal terms, owing to a lack of a budget and the absence of a strategy for the war's impact and its consequences, we had higher energy expenses with a fiscal impact. And so the corrective measures were aimed at putting Argentina back on the right path. We have to regain fiscal order because we have commitments and targets to meet, international commitments that Argentina must honor. We need to regain our trade surplus because Argentina's positive reserve accumulation happens when Argentina exports more than it imports, and that also calls for a strategy that entails consistency in strategy and policy among the economic areas, strategic decision making. So the decision to boost exports over the month of September was important, understanding that the agro-industrial complex around soy has a very strong presence globally. This also significantly affects reserve accumulation for Argentina. And at the same time, we believe it's important to increase capital investment in education, in science and technology, there to raise it above 0.35% of GDP. We want to see economic improvement across the board, because the challenge that we have as a government is to try to improve revenue, yes, but also the quality of life, better, higher quality jobs, higher investment, quality investment. So there are 6 or 7 economic pillars that we can look at individually if you like, but they really present a great opportunity for 2023. Now we have an additional issue because of the lack of accumulation of reserves, because Argentina had to deal with the pandemic without access to the credit markets. Unlike other countries, they had to float bonds to keep up employment, the health system, because we were in a process of renegotiation with the agreement with Argentina because of its debt profile, and this limited Argentina's ability to finance its COVID response through access to credit markets. And so that created an additional burden added to the political crisis, the fiscal crisis, a negative interest rate. All of this led to the departure of the minister and some macroeconomic instability, uncertainty that we tried to correct, and we've done that. We've reorganized spending but understanding the importance of maintaining key social spending to underpin growth, identifying what the most important expenditures were, all of this to try to also recover reserves lost because of the war, implement a program to support the agricultural industrial complex. Mr. Minister, you have a very broad plan. You've only just entered the ministry not that long ago, and you already have this broad-based plan for restoring Argentina's economic credibility. You're at a time when there are great expectations, where you have inflation of over 100%. What is your plan to reduce the inflation rate, and how does it look for the coming year? Well, I and my team took over with inflation projected to be very high. There were some measures that helped to stabilize or start to bring the rates down. There was a very slight reduction initially. This afternoon, we'll hear the new inflation estimates. We believe it will continue to go down. But I like to be very frank and brutal, actually, when need be, to bring inflation down. Argentina is going to have to go down a very specific path that includes being careful with reserves, setting interest rates that encourage saving with transactions being in pesos, and everything else we mentioned. We're seeing the patterns worldwide, but it's especially difficult in Argentina. But we are committed, and we are going to take steps where each macroeconomic target will give us a result that can be positive, but it requires us to have that capacity to stay the course so that we can protect Argentinians' pocketbooks from inflation, because inflation is the most destructive thing that can happen to an economy. It affects everyone's own finances, but hurts those who have little even more, and affects quality of life. Exactly. In parallel, there's the conversation about what's happening geopolitically, and that gives us challenges. There are things we need to focus on. Middle income countries are going to have restricted access to credit. The U.S. Federal Reserve, based on the numbers yesterday, is going to tighten policy, raise rates. And just the other day at the G20, the ministers were discussing this. We need to capitalize the multilateral agencies so that middle-income countries will have more access to credit via that route. It's key to change the way middle-income countries are treated. Argentina is a middle-income country, but 2 out of every 3 children lives in poverty. So when you make decisions, it would be a serious mistake to overlook that in the multilaterals analyses. And looking at the impact of the war, we were discussing this with the Caribbean countries, how this impacted their countries, and none of the multilaterals has reacted yet to the impact of the war on, for example, the Caribbean countries who aren't energy producers and had to import energy at excessive prices. So the war's impact, the way multilateral policy is designed for middle income and poor countries, that should be the agenda for the next 2 weeks, in addition to the European agenda. It's an issue that we at the Atlantic Council are very interested in, and we're working on it through our Geoeconomics Center, looking at the future of those institutions. Talking a bit more about difficulties in Europe. Based on your conversations at the G20, how is Argentina preparing itself for the challenges and difficulties that might come over the next year with regard to Europe? And at the same time, there's an increase in fuel prices affecting Europe. So how is Argentina trying to position itself to be a key energy provider?
Well, I think there are 2 issues that have to be addressed. One has to do with the G20 dialogues that we had. Perhaps the most intelligent approach was provided by the Vice President of Spain, or Vice Minister of Spain. And I think the best definition is that the best economic stability are built by the peace processes. In Argentina, we are constantly talking about social peace, and there's no social peace without macroeconomic stability, without this kind of peace. So I think we see that, especially when we talk about wars, which have an incredible impact on the economies. There is an idea that was talked about in G20 for the cap prices that perhaps could be paid for energy. I honestly think that when governments start talking about restricting and imposing limitations on each of their own countries. I mean, I'm talking about next year's summer in Argentina, Europe's winter, that we're going to have to think about how far are we willing to make sacrifices, because these prices might not be respected or held. Yesterday, in one of the reports that we were given among the ministers, is that there was talking also about fragmentation. Fragmentation is also an important challenge to the global economies. And among the greatest challenges that have to be resolved by countries we're talking minerals, energy, proteins, and obviously there's another issue, which is the cost, the shipping costs for goods, and that's another great challenge when we talk about fragmentation and things that could perhaps impact the economies in the years to come. Argentina has the ability and the possibility, because of the resources availed, to them, but we can be self-supplying in terms of energy, but we could also become a supplier on a world level. We have the second largest shale reserve, the fourth of a shale oil in the world. And I think we also play an important role, which has three phases. One phase will occur during 2023. Actually, when I was just about to come here, I was seeing pictures that was sent to me about a gas pipeline that is under construction right now, and that will provide us with 93% of self-supplying product, and that will also allow us to increase production. And we have more than even 11 million cubic meters on a daily basis, and perhaps we can see Chile as our first market. We might start these exports to Chile anew, and we also talked about that in Brazil. There's a pipeline that we're discussing about, just like Bolivia brings gas to us and Brazil to us, that we can maybe do it in the reverse direction. And there's a second phase of that pipeline will also give us access to the Rio Grande do Sul and to the Brazilian market for gas. There's also a third element that has to do with hydrogen, and we will be sending to Parliament a new law that will hopefully will provide that fiscal ability, and that we are able to have access to currency and the tax incentives for these policies that should be a state policy. And we hopefully we know that Argentina has expressed interest between Petronas and PFF, but Argentina needs several LNG plants, and we have other projects with regards to the different products that we have. We have solar energy, we have gas. Argentina has wind energy, very strong energy, especially in the Patagonia, and I think that helps us with these hydrogen projects. And I think up to a certain degree, both types of energy are feasible, and it could be an opportunity for vis-a-vis the world. Obviously, because of the winter that's coming, we do not have a lot of opportunity to help the European nations.
Diseño de acuerdo con Europa nos va a permitir, primero, que Europa tenga.
But we hope that Europe might have a bigger offering at the time of buying energy, and perhaps Argentina might have access to that market, but we have to invest in infrastructure. Going back to your position as minister, and with regards to the challenges faced and the different opportunities that might arise, especially with energy, what does success mean for you? If we talking about 2-3 months now, maybe 6 months from now, at least from your perspective, what would you consider to have been a successful effort and in the short term, and perhaps also in the middle term? Success, basically, it's a sensation, it's a feeling, it's almost a very ephemeral feeling. It's a fleeting moment because there's a challenge that arises every day. When societies are able to achieve a certain quality of life, then they aspire to a better quality of life, and that obviously is a challenge in terms of governing the people. But I think what we have to focus on now is on stability, is to reduce inflation, and our focus for 2023 will be to sustain the public investments and to face the challenges that we face. I don't like to talk about success necessarily, because I do believe that when you have an outlook in terms of the economics point of view, but also when you talk about politics and you talk about society, I think we also have to understand that society will always be trying to aspire to an even better quality of life. And obviously, we live in a fast-changing world of technology, and that revolution has also changed. It's changed of how information is coming so fast that we have to respond at an even faster rate. So that also has impacted how society holds their expectations and being able to aspire to their dreams. When I was younger, in terms of, for example, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be as an adult, I would see my peers and my neighbors to see who I wanted to become. But nowadays, like my son can interact with people from Japan, from Brazil, from the United States, from all over the world. So I think globalization and the speed with which technology and information gets to us, I think kind of exacerbates the frustration and the sensation of success. Yesterday, there was The Economist published an article, talked about you, and they said the only difference between you are the difference between Argentina and chaos. I mean, what do you think about this title? Well, I think Argentina faced a very difficult situation between July and August. And I think that the economy in Argentina is still facing incredible challenges in its economy. It's a very weak economy that we need to strengthen. And somehow I believe that in any case, what we saw in terms of political leadership, we saw political leadership, and this political leadership is also a result of my ability to talk within all the actors of the coalition of my government as well as with the opposition. I believe dialogue is the best path to be able to build a consensus and dissent in politics. I think that job or that role was actually, they questioned me on that because they were saying that really had an impact on my relationship building. But I think we have to be able to talk to everybody and work with everybody in order to regain that fiscal order. You've been here at the Atlantic Council. We always advocate for dialogue and consensus, especially with the greatest challenges of the world. Mr. Minister, I would like to thank you for your participation in today's event and for such an important situation for for Argentina. I would like to also yield the floor to Josh Lipsky, my colleague at the Geoeconomics Center. Muchas gracias, ministro, y gracias, Jason. Esta semana ha sido una maravillosa colaboración entre el Centro de la Geoeconomía, el Centro Adrian Ash de América Latina y todos los centros del Atlantic Council. Este es uno de nuestros últimos eventos de una semana de reuniones del Fondo Monetario. Y nuestros salones han llenado esta semana con las conversaciones de los ministros de Finanzas y los gobernadores de los bancos centrales. Hemos escuchado varios temas. La subida del dólar es una preocupación para el resto del mundo. Número 2, las perspectivas económicas mundiales son decididamente sombrías. Existe un verdadero riesgo de recesión mundial de cara al 2023. Eso es un serio riesgo que ha indicado el Banco Mundial, el Fondo Monetario.
A series of what I would describe as cascading shocks in recent years: pandemic, supply chains, inflation, war. But there has also been an unprecedented level of coordination between most of the world's largest economies. And for that cooperation to continue, and you raised this in the interview, the Bretton Woods Institutions themselves, the IMF and the World Bank, have to step up to this moment. And I was particularly interested in your comments about discussions within the G20 about capitalization and the need to resource middle-income countries. Now, Jason, you said, and I said, this is our last event of the week, but it's not our last event of IMF World Bank Week. And the reason is that on Monday, the Geoeconomics Center will launch the Bretton Woods 2.0 project. And that's designed to help ensure the international financial system is fit for purpose for the challenges ahead, issues you raised, Minister. And we will launch 4 new major research papers on areas of reform and improvement for the Bretton Woods Institutions. And we will also announce a major fellowship program to help foster a new generation of economic creativity and collaboration in a new generation of economists. And we hope, working together with finance ministers and governments across the world, this will be the beginning of a true reform moment for the Bretton Woods system. We think that time has come. So I thank you for being here, Minister. I thank all of you for joining us throughout the week. We hope you join us Monday for the project launch, and we wish everyone a wonderful weekend.